The rest of the National Crime Victimization Survey, and then self-report surveys on offending, and then after today, from here to the end of the semester, we're going to be doing theoretical stuff that I find a lot more interesting, from crime trends to correlates to theory. By the way, I just want you to know, I know the world is dark and scary out there. I love y'all, and I'm excited to be with y'all, to be here. So hopefully, as scary as it can be sometimes, it's still somewhat nice to be in class. Okay. We're going to do some of the stuff we did the other day. We're going to repeat just to make sure you all have it. We went through a lot of this all the way down to the end. The National Crime Victimization Survey, you should have this in your notes already, so just make sure. It began in 1972. Originally it was the National Crime Survey, and it's collected by the Bureau of Justice Statistics along with the Census Bureau. We covered that last time. So what it provides, like we said last time, is it provides victimization rates per 1,000. Specifically, it looks like this. So when we went over how to calculate the crime rate using police data, the UCR, the NIPRS, right, or the real-time crime index, they divide the number of crimes known to police by the population size taken from the census, and then multiply it by 100,000 to get crime rates, like the index crime rate, right? Well, the NCVS takes the number of victimizations, divides it by the population, and multiplies it by 1,000. So the base rate multiplier is 1,000, and it gives you victimization rates per every 1,000 people. That is, out of 1,000 people, how many people were victimized in the last year? Gives you victimization rates out of 1,000 people. Which means if you wanted to compare the victimization rate in the NCVS for some offense, like right to that in the police data, you have to multiply it by 100, right? To get it on the same scale. So obviously, if NCVS provides victimization rates, what it does is it asks respondents to self-report if they have been a victim of a crime in the past 6 months. We're going to unpack that. There's more to it than that. We're going to go deeper than you want to go, but we're still going to go there. They're asked to self-report if they have been a victim of a crime in the past 6 months. They have been a victim of a crime in the past 6 months. And as the last thing we talked about in the last class, and just making sure we're all on the same page, and if you weren't here, you at least got this much of the last lecture, is that the National Crime Victimization Survey uses an extremely large sample. Extremely large sample. Because it has to. It wants to get at crimes that are really severe, because they don't happen much, which we're going to say a little bit later, right? They do happen much, way too often, but they don't happen sufficiently to be easy to measure, unless you have a really large sample. So I told you last time, we're going to get into the actual sampling design of the NCVS in just a minute, but I told you last time it randomly sampled households, and new households are constantly being brought in. But in any given year, the estimates in the NCVS are based on hundreds of thousands of randomly sampled Americans, right? Their households are sampled, and then they're interviewed. To give you an example, I'm going to pull up the most recent one. So every year, they release a report. You can find it online by just typing in crime victimization NCVS report, and it takes 2 seconds to find it. Every year, they release a new one that has the victimization rates from the last year. So the last one that was released was in 2024, and it has the data in 2023. The next one will be released sometime this year, probably in the next and it will have the data from 2024, right? So this is from the 2024 one about the 2023 data. So the 2023 victimization rates were based on interviews with 226,000 randomly sampled Americans. They were randomly sampled from 142,000 households. That's a really big sample that generalizes to America as a whole, right? And like I noted last time, this is the biggest, best, most expensive, most highly funded, most tested survey. It is literally like the most reliable survey ever. For example, it's underneath that highlighted thing, right? Underneath within participating household interviews with 226,000 persons were completed. Under that, you get an 82% unweighted response rate. Most of the polls that you see from places like Gallup and Pew and Roper and places like that have a response rate of about 4%. Nobody wants to take surveys anymore. Yet the NCBS still gets really relatively high ones. It's really well done. Okay. All right, so one of the things it shows, goes back to what we talked about last time, is that the dark figure of crime is big. Most crime does not get reported to police. Most crime does not get reported to police. Most crime does not get reported to police. Specifically, there's about, depending on the offense, there's about 2 to 3 times more crime going on than police know about. Depending on the offense. There's about 2 to 3 times more crime happening than the police know about. Let me show you. So in the NCBS, they ask you, and I'm going to tell you how they do it, if you've been a victim of a crime in the last 6 months, and then they also ask you if you reported that crime to police. So this is, they don't always put this in every single crime in the United States report, criminal victimization report, but they do in some years, and so you can see, right, what percent of the crime is reported. So this is the percent of victimizations reported to police by type of crime in 2020 and 2021, right? So if you start at the top, total violent crime, which I've highlighted in yellow, only 40% in 2020 and 46% with rounding in 2022-21. So most violent crime was not reported. When you get down to rape/sexual assault, only 23%, 22% was reported. The vast majority of rapes and sexual assaults were not reported to police. You drop down to more to total property crime, right? The thing I have highlighted, the third highlight down, only about 33% of property crime is reported to police. Burglary, less than half. And that's one of the most serious property crimes, right? Other theft in the 20s, 28, 26%. The majority of crime happening in the United States does not get reported to police, so it is missed by the UCR, it is missed by the NIVRS, it is missed by the real-time crime index. Now, your first inclination might be to think that that means that the UCR, the NIVRS, the real-time crime index are useless, that they're uninformative, that they're inaccurate. But that's not necessarily true. If the UCR and the NIVRS miss most crime, but the amount of crime they miss is stable from year to year to year, they might underestimate crime, but accurately estimate crime trends. That is, they may never give you the right amount of crime, but when crime goes up, they may also show it. We're going to see that in a little bit. Even if they miss most crime, they may still be accurate over time if the biases that are in there are stable, right? Okay. So it provides additional information. I sort of already got there by types of crimes are not likely to be reported to police. And I'm going to tell you what it shows, which is just another way to say what we already said last week when I gave you our last class, when I gave you that acronym SWIFT AI about the indicators of severity that lead people to call police. This is basically the same thing but said a little bit differently. It just beats up that point. There's a little bit of nuance in here. It provides additional evidence about types of crimes that are not likely to be reported to police. As you would guess, the first type is minor crimes. The less severe the crime, the more minor it is, the less likely it is to be reported to police. The second type is attempted crimes, which we also talked about last time. Crimes that are not completed. The third type, which we saw on the last slide, is sexual crimes. Crimes of a sexual nature, although severe, and even when completed, are underreported. The fourth type are property crimes happening outside of the home. Last class we said the invasion of your home is a predictor of calling police. This is the same thing. Property crimes that happen outside of your home are less likely to be reported. Just heads up, on the first test there's like 20, 30 questions about measuring crime. And most of them are going to make you have to be able to distinguish the different things, like NCBS and UCR, NIDRS, things like that, right? And a lot of the stuff, in fact, the majority of the stuff that I'm saying about these things are not in the book, so you should be taking fairly good notes. The last type of crime the NCBS suggests is not likely to be reported to police is crime committed by people you know, by your friends, or by people that you're related to. Crimes by people you know are underreported. In 1 year, crimes committed by relatives, people that you're related to, only 22% were reported to police. Crimes committed by your friends, your roommates, your fraternity brothers, only 58% were reported to police. But crimes committed by strangers, people you didn't know, 78% were reported to police. It is a really strong predictor how well you know the offender with whether or not you're going to report it to police. Okay. The other thing that the NCBS provides additional information about is crime trends. So we can see whether or not the UCR, the NIDRS, and all that are accurate. This is the most recent victimization trend in the last NCBS. So if you go get the last NCBS, the last one they published, it shows victimization rates from the 1990s to 2023, right? Which is the last year that they released. You see two things here. You see the victimization rate, and you see the percent of violent victimization reported to police, right? The rate of reporting. The gray line. What we just talked about a lot of crime not being reported is indicated by the big ass gap right there. Right? Which is not as big anymore. It's still there, but it's declined. Right? It's something we talked about last time. People have become more likely to report crime to police over time. Now, if you go to Brightspace, this is actually not the graph that one from before. It didn't have 2023 yet on there. Nevertheless, the story is really clear, and it's not one that most people intuitively assume. Most people don't believe or know that crime in the United States is at a really low level, right? It's been declining almost continuously, and we're going to go deep into this and explain why, almost continuously since the early 90s, right? Beginning in the mid-early 90s, crime started going down, and yes, there have been some upticks here and there, but it's really, really low right now compared to what it was. Now, this is the NCDS. One of the questions we have, and the whole reason that they developed the NCDS and they funded it and they tested it, was does police data provide an accurate story of crime trends? Because we know that most crimes are not reported to police, but is it still accurate for crime trends? This is the rate of violent victimization in the NCDS. It has nothing to do with police, and this is the police data. By the way, it's rate per 1,000. And you'll notice that age 12 and older, I was going to say that later, but the only people who are respondents in the NCDS are people who are age 12 or older, under the assumption that if you're not at least 12 years old, you don't have the cognitive capabilities to be a reliable survey respondent. So the only people interviewed are people 12 and older. Okay, so now let's see what it looks like compared to police data. This is the police data at the top. This is the UCR and IDRS. 1993 all the way to 2022. Looks exactly the same, right? For the most part. This is what's interesting. Although they don't line up perfectly, police data and victim survey data, two totally independent sources, mostly tell the same story about crime trend. There are some places where they're different. I'll show you where they're different when we get to it. They mostly tell the same story. The same story is basically this. The safest time to live in the United States, in terms of crime, despite how scary the news can be, is really like now, for the most part, right? At least in the last several decades. Now you'll notice the graph at the top, which is police data, is the rate per 100,000 people, whereas the victim survey data is the rate per 1,000, because they have that different base rate multiplier. This is what we just said. I said it on the earlier slide. We're going to skip it. It just reveals the types of crimes that are not likely to get reported to police. The one additional point that we're going to mention here is that when they ask people if they reported it to police or not, they also ask them why. And so the NCDS tells us why people don't report crimes to the police. What are the reasons they give for not reporting crimes to police? And the reasons that people give differ depending on whether or not the crime is a crime by someone they know or not. The reasons people give for not reporting family crimes, crimes by people they're related to, are that it is a private matter. That they don't think it's a public matter, they don't think it's anyone's business. That it is a private matter. That it is not anyone's business. Now, the reason they give for why they don't report stranger crimes, crimes committed by strangers, is different. The most common reason that people don't report stranger crimes is they don't think the police can do anything or will do anything. Many years ago, like 10 years ago, I had an iPod, one of those things where you could like listen to music before you could just plug it into your phone and do it in the same way. And I used to listen to Lil Wayne all the way in class to get pumped up so I would be more energetic. And also, it's scary. Even after teaching for like 10, 15 years, the first one or two times you lecture, you feel like you're going to blow up every semester. Somebody stole it. at the end of class, I had people come out and talk to me, and I looked down and gone. Right? I didn't report it to the police. They didn't even do anything about it. Last year, my mother, who's older, got rear-ended by a car, and they pulled over to the side of the road, and she went to get out and walk over to talk to the lady who destroyed the back of her car, and the lady just took off. So my mother called the police department, and they're like, okay, yeah, we'll look into it. She's like, but how do you look into it? Because you didn't even ask me anything about the fucking car. They didn't care, right? They weren't going to. But the idea is that police aren't, a lot of people don't think they're going to do anything about crimes unless those crimes are really severe. So when it's a crime by a stranger, the most common reason people don't report it is they don't think police are going to do anything about it. Now, one of the unique things about the NCBS, it does not collect information on all types of crime. I've got pictures of two of the types of crime that it does not collect information on the slide. The first one is arson. Setting things on fire. The NCBS does not collect, this is a test question, right? I'm going to ask you, which of the following does the NCBS collect data on, right? It is an absolute test question. They do not collect information on arson. Part of the reason is although arson often happens against houses, it can also happen against other things, right? Like forests. And there's not always a victim you can interview about it. The second type of crime that the NCBS does not collect information on is the second picture, and that is commercial crimes. Crimes against businesses, like Walmart or Target, if you were to steal from Walmart. And the reason, obviously, it doesn't collect information on commercial crime is it's a household survey of people living in households and not of business owners, right? So it is not designed from a sampling perspective to be representative of corporations and businesses. The third type of crime that the NCBS does not collect information on is homicide, when somebody is killed. Homicide, when somebody is killed. Now, the easiest reason that they don't collect information on homicide that you would think is, well, the victim's dead, so they can't be interviewed. That's not actually why they don't do it. They can interview people in the household and say, has anyone in your household been killed in the last 6 months? They don't do it for two reasons. One reason goes back to this. You'll remember that the homicide rate in the United States is generally around 4.5 to 5.5 per 100,000 over the last 15 years, right? So out of every 100,000 people, somewhere between 4.5 and 5.5, depending on the year, get killed. So even with a sample of 226,000, you're talking like 10, 15 homicide victims in these households max. That's just not it's such a rare crime. It's so uncommon that they can't reliably estimate. That's the main reason they don't try to measure homicide in the NCBS. It's just so uncommon. The other reason they don't try to measure it is the UCR and the NIDRS do a damn good job of it because there's a body. So police generally know about it and they take it very seriously, right? So unlike a lot of the crimes, homicide is not a crime that's underreported, and police do a really good job of paying attention to it, and they have a fantastic job, and their data that they have are the most reliable for homicide. So it would be redundant to try to do it in the NCBS. So remember, the NCBS does not measure information about arson, commercial crimes, or homicide. That is a test question. You're going to have to know it. So very shortly, we're going to get into the correlates of crime. That is what things predict from any crime, who commits the most crime. This is the victimization rate, violent victimization rate in 2020 and 2021 for different age groups. And this is just foreshadowing where we're going to go before I get back to the NCBS method. And as you would probably guess, and I'll show you why I say that later in another lecture, the people who are most likely to be victimized are people who are approximately your age or a little bit older. Right? 18 to 24. Most people in this class are like 17 to 19 on average, in my experience. 18 to 24 has the highest violent victimization rate, followed by people who are 25 to 34. Alright, so we're going to get into the method a little bit, because the more we get into the method, the more you understand it, and the more questions you'll be able to answer accurately. So it uses a national probability sample of households. Probability means random. Randomly selects households. Most really highly reliable surveys do that. They use address-based sampling. They get the postal service delivery file thing. They randomly sample households. So it randomly samples households, and then it interviews everybody in the household who's at least 12 years old. So it doesn't randomly sample individuals, it randomly samples households, and then interviews everyone in it who's at least 12 years old. It interviews everybody in the household who's at least 12 years old. What kind of survey design? It uses a rotating panel design. It has to. That's a methodological advancement. It uses a rotating panel design. The rotating part means that in any given year, households are being rotated out of the sample and new households are being rotated in. So in any given year, there's a sample of households that's changing. New households are brought in, old households are brought out. That's the rotating part. The panel part, whenever you hear of a panel survey, that means it's longitudinal. It continues. It's not a one-time thing. The panel part means that once a household is brought into the sample, it is interviewed repeatedly for 3.5 years. Every 6 months for 7 interviews over 3.5 years. It is interviewed every 6 months for 7 total interviews over 3.5 years. I will tell you why that's so important in a little while. It is interviewed every 6 months for 7 total interviews over 3.5 years, after which it's rotated out. Now, imagine that your household or somebody you know's household is randomly sampled and rotated in. And when it's rotated in, there's a mother, a husband, and 2 children. One's 13, one's 11. The 13-year-old will be interviewed. And imagine after a year, the mother divorces the guy because he's cheating on her and kicks him out of her freaking house. And downloaded the NCBS 2023 and you went to the methodology section, you'd see it. Now, the respondents in the household are broken up in two types, which are overlapping. The word that's cut off there is respondents. This thing is supposed to disappear, but I got the animation timing mixed up. Introduce two types of respondents, which are overlapping. The first type of respondent is an individual respondent. Everybody who's age 12 is an individual respondent. The individual respondents report on victimizations happening to them personally. Have you been a victim of a crime in the last 6 months? Individual respondents report on victimizations against them. One of the people in the household is not just an individual respondent, but also designated as a household respondent. Maybe the boss mom who kicked the dude out, right? That boss respondent is called a household respondent, and they report on crimes against the household, like burglary. The household respondent reports on crimes against the household. Involves how many steps in the interviewing process? This is another big methodological innovation that made the NCBS more reliable. I have got to get this thing to, there it goes, it disappears. I got to get the animation right? We're on number 13. It involves how many steps in the interviewing process? Two. Two steps. The first step is a screening interview. It asks if something has happened.
Thank you.
It is a screening interview. It asks if something has happened. Has somebody punched you? Has somebody hit you with a weapon? Has somebody thrown something at you? Has somebody stolen something from you? How about at school? How about at work? How about somebody you know? That's the screening interview, and that's actually how they do it. They have a whole bunch of cues that are designed to be time, place, person. Has somebody you know hit you? Has somebody hit you at work? Has somebody hit you at school? And they're designed to open up those boxes in your memory where you have things, how, to help you remember. And it's a screening interview, and then if you say yes, you get an incident report where you have to give all the details. That's the second step. Has somebody hit you? Has somebody attacked you with a weapon at school, at work, while you were out, at a restaurant? Yes. Give us all the details. And they give you an incident report where you say everything that happened. That's the second step. Screening and then an incident report. Screening and then an incident report. All right, now you get down to number 14, right? Uses what type of approach to define victimization, to figure out what happened. So people go through the screening, they say, yes, somebody hit me when I was at a restaurant, and then they give them the incident report, and they say, what happened? How are they related to you? And you get all the information. How do they figure out what crime happened? They use the attribute approach. approach simply means they give all the information to a legal expert who figures out exactly what crime happened. All the information to legal experts, and probably increasingly AI, to figure out what crime happened. Speaking of AI, I saw one of the funniest AI graphs. So somebody went and tracked every speech given in the British Parliament over the last 10 years, and they have a similarity to AI-generated content, and they have the day that ChatGPT came out publicly, and it's like flat, 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 and then cool. No, none of those politicians are writing their own speeches anymore, right? This is hilarious to me. So it gives all the information from the incident report to legal experts to figure out what crime happened. They have to do that because most people don't know what crimes are. Many people confuse robbery and burglary, right? If I asked you what the difference between an aggravated assault and a simple assault was, in a high probability you wouldn't know, right? You wouldn't know exactly what things make something an aggravated assault. My lawyer told me if you hire me, it's a simple assault, right? And if you don't, it's an aggravated assault. All right, now, victim surveys have a lot of problems, and a lot of what goes on in the NCDS are designed to mitigate them, to fix them. We're going to go through the problems, and where the NCDS's method has been designed to deal with it, I'm going to tell you. And again, the main reason to do this the way we're doing it is so you know crime data. You know what crime looks like, and you can have a lot of faith in your understanding of it. Or if you went to ChatGPT, which you can do, and ask it to draw you the crime rate since 1960, it will. Like that. You know what data it's showing. It's showing you police data. Because if it goes past 1972, it can't be the victim survey data. So one of the first problems is that there is systematic bias in reporting. Different types of people answer surveys differently. Different types of people answer surveys differently. Let me give you one example. Over many years, they found that assault victimization, that is the probability in the NCDS of saying that somebody had beat your ass, was actually higher among people with better education, which is weird. Because in general, the higher your socioeconomic status, the more insulated you are from crime. You live in a nice neighborhood, right? You don't have to take public transit, etc., etc., etc. So on average, you would expect people with higher income and higher education to not get assaulted more. But people with better education were saying they'd been assaulted more. And they couldn't figure out the anomaly. And they came up with two possible explanations. One, education makes you a better survey respondent. You can read better, you can reply better, you can understand questions better, and thus your reliability as a respondent just goes up. That's one possibility. You're just a better respondent. The other possibility is differences in interpretation. What you define as an assault. What you define as an assault. I was from a fairly high socioeconomic family. My mom was taking care of me, but they let me box. And most of my friends growing up were boxers. And they fought all the time, both in the ring, with each other, their brothers, and on the street, all the time. And I'll tell you some stories about them throughout the semester. If they got slapped or punched, they wouldn't define it as an assault. It was normal to them. So the possibility is that people who are higher education, higher socioeconomic status we're interpreting smaller forms of physical altercations, like being shoved, as an assault, where people who grew up in high crime areas, low socioeconomic status, interpret it as normal day-to-day stuff. People shove you, they slap you, stuff happens. It's not an assault. It could be differences in interpretation. The point being that lead different types of people to respond differently to a victim survey. Now, one of the major issues with victim surveys is something called discrete events. The word discrete here doesn't mean like, shh, don't tell nobody. It means bounded in time or place. Finite. Bounded in time or place. Victim surveys like the NCDS, which asks if you've been a victim in the last 6 months, treat victimization as a discrete event, as if it is an event that is bounded in time or place, as if it is an event that has a beginning and an end. And what that means is it does a very shitty job at getting at types of victimization that are ongoing, are continuous. It does a very bad job at getting at types of victimization that do not have a beginning and end, that are ongoing, are continuous. Such as domestic violence, child abuse, ongoing, continuous forms of victimization, sexual harassment. It does not do a good job at getting at ongoing victimization. Now, the NCS has tried. It's tried. It uses something called a series victimization. When you say, yes, this has happened to me, in the incident report, if you say it's happened a certain enough times in the last 6 months, they give you a series victimization where it's happened so many times that you can't reliably say how many times and the characteristics of each, right? So, but they don't actually include that series victimization and victimization rate because it's so hard to reliably count each incident and reliably get information about it. So they count it once instead of as a series thing. Here it is in 1993 to 1999, and then between 2000 and 2009, the percent of victimizations reported as series victimizations by the type of crime. What percent of these crimes are series victimizations? What percent of them are ongoing or continuous? Do not have a clear beginning or end. You can see here that the type that is most likely to be continuous or ongoing is rape, sexual assault, and simple assault. Simple assault often includes the ongoing chronic forms of domestic violence, which can turn into aggravated assault and murder, but the day-to-day stuff is often classified as a simple assault. Right? Continuous, ongoing, no clear beginning and end. The other thing that they provide you here is where. This is the activity or what you were doing during the most recent violent series victimization. So for people who had a serious victimization, this is where it was at. As you can see here, the most common places that you see these serious victimizations are at work, like sexual harassment, right? Bullying at work. sexual harassment at school in a continual, ongoing way. This victim surveys, even the NCDS, don't do a good job of getting at these forms of victimization. In fact, in the NCDS, many of the interviews happen by phone, and they don't make any effort to make sure if you're being domestically abused, that the questions they're asking you aren't being answered in the same room as the person that's abusing you. One of the things that victim surveys struggle to do is, in the case of certain victimizations, is really get at the context. That is, who is the victim and who is the offender? Like an assault. Did you start it? Did you start it? I've been in a handful of streetlights, and if you ask me if I started any of them, I'd say, no, I didn't start shit. Right? Like, if you ask people I was in a fight with, they'd probably be like, yeah, that little short fucker. Right? You would get different stories. They don't do a good job of figuring out who is the aggressor in assault-type victimization. One of the limitations of victim surveys is definitional problems where police, particularly around assaults and victims, define them differently in severity. Police and victims perceive, especially assaults, as different levels of severity. Alright, now here, the next ones are the ones that the NCDS was designed to deal with. Rare events. Now, there are a lot of victim surveys. Many of them can't do it well. The NCDS can get at rare events. Rare events are things that don't happen much, hence the word rare. Like severe victimization, right? Things that are really severe but uncommon. The NCDS has done all you can do to get at it, and with the exception of homicide, it does a really good job by having a huge example. That's why it has a huge sample, is to get at these rare events. Another huge issue is memory decay, forgetting, misremembering stuff. People forget. They're especially likely to forget minor stuff. If someone robs you with a gun, you're unlikely to forget it. Minor stuff. Somebody steals your sunglasses. Forgetting. The way the NCDS deals with this, which is a huge major threat that the NCDS deals with amazingly, is with the screening interview. It has a whole bunch of cues. Did somebody hit you? Did they attack you with a weapon? Was it someone you knew? Was it at school? Was it at work? While it was at your restaurant? They ask you all these things that are designed. Sometimes you know how you might be trying to remember some actor's name, and somebody mentions a movie they're in and you get it, or vice versa. You're trying to remember a movie and you can't. Somebody mentions the actor that was in it, and you're like, oh, that was Rounders. And you get it immediately, right? Sometimes you need something else to be mentioned to get it. The screening interview, the two-step interviewing process, was designed to help people find stuff in their brain, and there's strong evidence that it works, right? It helps reduce memory decay, forgetfulness around victimization. The other major design issue in the NCDS that we mentioned is designed to get at telescoping. Memory misfire. Memory misfire. Telescoping is when you remember something, but you don't remember when it happened, so you move it into the wrong time period. Yeah, I was a victim in the last 6 months, but the actual victimization happened 8 months ago. You missed date. You put the wrong date to the victimization. This is a huge problem in surveys. Misremembering when it happened. Misremembering when it happened. So this is actually the main reason that you have the rotating panel design. So what the NCDS does 6 months for 7 interviews over 3.5 years. The first interview, they actually don't count toward the victimization rate. Then, in the second interview, they ask you about all the victimizations that happened since the first interview. And in the next interview, they ask you about all the victimizations that have happened since the last interview. And anytime you report anything, they cross-check it with what you already said. So they've done two things there. They've bounded the reference period. You know how long 6 months was because they're talking about the last interview, and they have that first interview to make sure you don't report things twice. And this makes it so people can accurately date things, and the administrators can pull out things that are misdated or repeatedly reported. The rotating panel design, the longitudinal nature of the NCBS, the re-interviews are designed to deal with telescoping. And it works really well, which is why the NCBS is so reliable. Okay, now, once you get beyond National Crime Victimization Survey, which is a survey on victimization, you get the self-report surveys of offending. Self-report surveys of offending. The last major methods piece we're going to talk about. Now, self-report surveys of offending are the #1 method for testing criminological theory. That's where all the blanks are. The #1 method for testing criminological theory. #1 method for testing criminological theory. Most of this class, we're going to be talking about theories. Rational choice theory, right? Social bond theory, self-control theory. All these theories for why some people commit crime, in quotes, right? Why some people commit crime and other people don't. Those theories are developed. The way they are tested is with self-report surveys on offending. This is the primary #1 way that we test all these criminological theories for why people commit crime. So what they do is they ask individuals to self-report if they have done bad things. They ask people to self-report if they have committed crimes. They ask individuals to self-report, to admit, to tell if they have committed crimes. To self-report if they have committed crimes. Now your first common sense reaction might be, that's dumb. Why would people tell you? Used to, in the first day of this class, I stopped doing it because it took too much time and I had more stuff I wanted to do, I would hand out a survey. That was anonymous. You didn't put your name on it. And it had 24 types of behavior that you could have done that are all legal, right? Driven after drinking enough alcohol, tried to have sex with someone against their will, stolen something, and people would answer it. They'd pass it back with no names on it, we'd mix it up, and then I'd pass it back out. And then I'd read it out, and you'd stick your hand up, and the person who had answered the survey in front of you said yes. And what it would show is that virtually everybody in the classroom would say yes on some stuff, right? Like when it came to doing minor forms of crime, like stealing and fighting, you'd have 15, 20, 30% of the class on every one of them, and the whole class on something, right? It just demonstrates in a very conventional population of well-educated people that crime is relatively common. You would ask, why would people do that? Right? Why would people answer? By the way, these are some of the examples of the questions I would ask the college students in class, and the percent of people who said yes, right? Like, have you used cocaine in the last 12 months? 20%, 13%, 8%. How many times have you driven after drinking enough alcohol and feel drunk? And this is not yes, this is 6+ times. 24%, 26%, 18%. In the last 12 months, how many times have you been involved in a fight was it unsafe? You did not use protection. 41%, 40%, 34%, right? Which hopefully, if you're not married, you have sex and it's completely fine, right? Just wear protection so you don't blow up like a blueberry. Like we were talking about the first thing. These are just some of the questions that I would ask. And right, there's 24 of them, and you would see that hands would constantly go up. Crime is relatively constant, right? So, now, you'll notice if you look, there seems like in these self-report surveys here, people are answering honestly, just in these 3 time periods, which are not at all generalizable because they're different, right? Summer, fall, spring, different students in each. It looks like everybody's getting better. From 20% to 8, from 24 to 18, from 22 to 10, from 6 to 0, from 41 to 34. It looks like college kids have stopped doing bad stuff and are more of them wearing protection. Which is interesting because this is just a snapshot of people in my class. And I used to do it for entertainment value and instructional value, but it kind of mirrors this. So this is using probability data where they interview people randomly selected throughout the United States who are all in 9th grade and between 14 and 15 years old, and they've been doing it since 1991. I just got it from 1991 to 2017, and they ask them questions like, have you ever drank alcohol? Right? How much television do you watch per day? Ever tried cigarette smoking? Ever had sexual intercourse? Ever used marijuana? And people have stopped doing everything. Right? People have stopped smoking cigarettes. The blue line just whoop. People have really curtailed how much alcohol they drink. That top green line is just tanked. Right? Marijuana, believe it or not, during this time period actually declined somewhat. Right? Watching television per day, that yellow line just tanks. And people stop getting laid. That red line is just like whoop. The only thing people did is play Call of Duty. That's it. And Halo, originally, right? Grand Theft Auto. The purple line, play video games, use computer 3.5 hours a day, has just shot up, right? Everybody stopped doing everything. It's really interesting because this is just one snapshot. It's actually something that's ongoing. We're going to come back to how powerful it is because this has actually led to a fundamental change in the nature of crime in the United States that you're going to see in a couple of weeks. But one of the things that's really interesting is, right, all the data on this. This is another one. Youth behavior in the United States, ever in my lifetime, alcohol, smoking, and weed. This one goes all the way to 2021. You can see the continuing trend. This is daily average time people spend with their friends for 3 different age groups, right? People your age, people a little bit older, and people my age, all gone down. This just came out, Homebound, by Patrick Sharkey, who's a distinguished professor at Princeton. People are staying at home. Between 2003 to 2022, the average amount of time at home among American adults rose by 1 hour and 39 minutes in a typical day, and it rose for every subset of the population and for virtually all activities. This is one of the most profound changes in the nature of social life in the United States. So this is also how people are spending their time. This is how much time, your effect on the time you spend in different places depending on whether or not you're staying at home. That means no effect. Anything above that red line means it increases the time you spend there. Anything below that line means it decreases. So the first thing you see with the blue bar is that the more people are spending time at home, the more time they're spending with their family. The second thing you see, the red bar, the more time people are spending at home, the less time they're spending with their friends. And the third thing is the more time people are spending at home, the more time they're spending alone. Right? It is a profound change over the last decade and a half. Alright, now the way we know that kind of stuff is that people answer self-report surveys. And you might ask, why do people do it? Why do they accurately answer self-report surveys, especially self-report surveys that ask if they've done illegal stuff? And the answer there is multi-pronged. First, it's anonymous or confidential. They don't have to put their name on it, or you don't reveal their name. It's anonymous or at least confidential. It's anonymous or at least confidential. You don't have to put their name on it. Now we know this has a huge effect. I'm going to show you some data over here. They've done numerous experiments over the last decade on the accuracy of self-reports under different modes. ACASI is auto-computer-assisted self-interviewing. You have a computer, you have headphones, it tells you the questions and you answer directly in the computer, you don't have to reveal your name. Right? This is computer-assisted personal interviewing. That means somebody has a computer and they ask you questions, you tell them your answers and they enter your answers in it. And this is computer-assisted self-interviewing where you just don't have the headphones, right, to read you the questions. Now, what I'm going to show you is how this affects responses. Notice the y-axis, the average number of sexual partners. So the question is, how many people have you slept with? I'm going to show you two lines. The answers for women and the answers for men, and how they change based on whether or not they have to tell people or enter it secretly into a computer. That's the story. When men get to tell people, they lie. They inflate it. They give a bigger number. When women have to tell people, they lie. They deflate it. They say, not many people. One. I love them. Right? They lie in different directions because of the existing norms around sex in the United States, which applaud men for sexual promiscuity and stigmatize women for the same behavior. So one reason people answer these surveys is that they're anonymous or at least confidential. Another reason people answer the surveys is that they don't involve any legal risk because they don't ask you for the details that would allow them to match it to an exact crime. They don't ask you for the date or for exactly what happened, for the victim's name. They don't ask for the details that would make it pose any kind of legal risk. Here's another example of the difference between interviewer-administered and self-administered. This one is specifically on criminal offending. Have you offended in the last year? Have you ever offended in your whole lifetime? The self-administered is the gray bars, which are significantly higher. The administered, where you have to tell it to someone, are the light bars, which are significantly lower. Right? The statistical significance is indicated by the asterisk on top of the things connecting the two bars. People tell the truth, but they can do it without putting their name on it. This is an example of auto-computer-assisted self-interviewing, where the person is answering the questionnaire on a computer, directly in the computer, and the questions are being read via a headphone, and their name is not attached to the survey. This is generally considered the best way to do it, and most of the major surveys is how they do it. So, despite everything I've said, and everything other people say, people want to know if they're accurate. So they spend a lot of time testing whether or not self-report surveys on offending are accurate or not. Or if they're more accurate for some groups than other groups. So I'll tell you that one of the readings that's on the test, right, is the Thornberry and Crumb reading on measuring self-report offending and all that. It's a long reading. It goes through the history of self-report crime. It goes through a bunch of indirect ways to get at self-report crime and get people to admit it. And it goes through the accuracy stuff. Very few people read that reading. There are questions on the test from it, like 3 or 4, right? That's one you want to know. I'm going to briefly touch on, are they accurate? They're very accurate, but not perfectly accurate. And there are some groups, I'm not going to tell you which ones it's in the reading, for which they are more accurate than others. There are some groups for which they are more accurate than others, but on average, they're very accurate. Microphone. I need one of these from home. I can walk around the house and order my kids around. My middle kid, he's 11, came home yesterday and said at recess, a girl came up to him and a bunch of other boys and asked if she could sacrifice one of them. And he volunteered, and she made him lay down and said she was a witness when stuff happened. And I said, son, listen, I love you, but if a woman comes up to you and says she wants to sacrifice you, the correct answer is no. Right? You don't volunteer for that shit. Are they accurate? One of the ways they find out they're accurate is they include fake drugs on. This is one of the common questions used on self-report surveys. Have you ever used Cimarron, which is a fake drug? If people are telling the truth, they should not say yes because it doesn't exist. Very, very, very few people lie and say they've done something that doesn't exist. Using fake drugs. I had this in the survey that I handed out to people in class, right? Nobody would say they did, right? And it's one of the ways you can tell they're accurate. The second way they're accurate is they have done many experiments where they have people do self-report surveys on offending, but they have those people's criminal records. And they're able to compare their known criminal record with what they admit in the survey, and they're able to see that people do a very good job of telling the truth. Do we know that they're accurate? What they primarily measure, however, is non-serious offending. What they primarily measure is non-serious crime, the more common types of crime. Non-serious offending. They primarily measure non-serious offending. And they generally show much higher rates of crime because they're measuring non-serious offending. They show that crime is ubiquitous, very, very common. Most people commit some type of crime. Yep, they show much higher rates of crime because they measure less serious forms of crime. Much higher rates of crime because they measure less serious crime. Now, number 5 says they generally show higher and weaker. We did the higher. Because they generally measure non-serious crime rather than felony robbery, they show much higher rates of crime. They show it's really, really common. They also show weaker correlations with things like socioeconomic status and even race. They show that in self-report surveys, the correlations between factors like socioeconomic status and crime are weaker because it's measuring a different kind of crime. So I want to show you, this is what an example of one looks like, right? The types of questions they ask. Please indicate how often in the past 12 months you did each of the following. The response options are never, 1 time, 2, 5 times, 6, 9 times, 10 or more times, so they measure the frequency of offending. And then they ask about various types of crime varying in severity. Stole something worth less than $50, stole something worth more than $50. Those are both property crimes, differing in severity. Participated in a fist fight, carried a weapon. You'll notice they also have cocaine. So they measure property crime, drug crime, and violent crime, and they do it at different severities. This is what a short self-report scale looks like. This is the kind that is often used to test criminological theories. Asking about street crime, property, drug, violent, and of different severity. Less severe and more severe. Right? Participating in a fist fight is arguably less severe than fighting someone using a weapon. That's an example of the differences in severity. This is what we're going to do. Right now, we're going to start 4 pieces of paper, 2 in the back, 2 in the front. You're going to print your name legibly so we can read it, and you're going to give it to my TV assistant here. If you're here today, you get 5 points extra credit. See y'all next time. What? So I take random attendance for extra credit. You write your name. We're going to start 4 pieces of paper, 2 in the back, 2 in the front. You're going to